Okay, we're recording the session and we're recording it. I discussed this already with some of the our counterparts, and I was suggesting that we would have to do it in sections. We're actually going to do it in one session. We've worked out a way to do that, so it will be recorded entirely today. And if I can just say actually, I'll just share my screen if this is okay. Just have a few slides here. Can everyone see that? I hope so anyway.
Yes.
Yeah. Just to say, this is the overview of the seminar. I've already more or less said this. We have the introduction and the background. That will consist of a few slides. Management directors themselves, then about the manual, and in today's seminar, we'll do those three areas: overview, strategic planning and budgeting, and accounting and compliance. Next week, we'll do the procedures and systems and financial reporting. Just about the background to the project. The engaged mission to assist with strengthening the capacities of public financial management unit in line ministries in Cyprus. The activity is funded under the Structural Reform Support Programme, which I think was 2017 to 2020. And the general objective is to contribute to institutional, administrative and growth sustaining structural reforms in the Republic of Cyprus. So from your own perspective, it's about reforming it's about achieving institutional and administrative reforms, but also it's about helping growth sustaining measures, which obviously affects everybody and is to everyone's benefit. It also takes account of the recommendation of the OECD Council on Public Service Leadership and Capability, which is broken into three pillars. I think you can see this here. Values-driven culture and leadership, skilled and effective public servants, and responsive and adaptive public employment systems. The key objectives of the public finance reforms are new laws, which have been to provide the framework for reforming public financial management, specifically the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget System Law and the Law for Accounting and Financial Management and Financial Control. The overall objectives are to modernise the budget process, increase financial transparency, and ultimately improve fiscal discipline. One other thing I should say is that we're talking about this manual, but this is one of a suite of deliverables that we've done. We've also done training needs assessment. We've done role descriptions for staff. We've helped to draft a manual. Well, we're currently drafting actually a manual for line ministries managers so that they understand more about financial management. So there's a number of things. This sits as an important component, but there are a number of components, and there's also a recognition that that it's not just about a technical thing. There is an element of this is being carried out by staff who have to be given the capability of carrying out their new role with a greater focus on financial management and achieving that, rather than say bookkeeping or just recording financial transactions without really thinking what they're about. So there's a large number of things in this, and this is just one element. Now, I'm going to stop sharing that screen. And so I'll hand over to Natalia to make a few remarks on behalf of DG Reform. After that, then we can hear from the Accountant General, and then I'll go to Tim, and Tim can do the presentation. Natalia, are you there?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Brian. Good morning, Rhea. Good morning, team, Brian and colleagues. As Brian said, I am Natalia Spevchak-Vandenberg, and I work for DG Reform at the European Commission. DG Reform has been providing support to many member states since 2016, indeed, within the structural reform support program from 2016 to 2020, under which the current project has received support amongst many others in Cyprus and in other member states. And we are continuing support through the technical support instrument in 2021 to 2027. We're very happy to have been able to collaborate with the OECD on this project and with the magnificent Cyprus team in order to prepare all of the manuals and other documents that brought us to this workshop today. So without any further delay and not keeping you anymore in suspense, maybe I will invite the Accountant General to say a couple of words, and then we can switch to team and to listen to the presentation.
Good morning, everybody. I would like first to thank you from the outset, our experts from the OECD for their excellent recommendations on reforming the public financial management in Cyprus, and especially Natalia and the European Commission for assisting us in managing to have these manuals in place and be able today to start the seminars in order for our staff to be able to understand and apply your recommendations. Thank you again very much for that. I would now revert to Greek so that I will speak to my colleagues about today's launching of the seminars. Αγαπητοί μου συνάδελφοι, καλημέρα σας. Είναι με μεγάλη μου χαρά που σας καλωσορίζω σε αυτά τα διαδικτυακά εργαστήρια, τα οποία διοργανώνονται από τον ΟΣΑ, τον OECD, σε συνεργασία με το Γενικό Λογιστήριο της Δημοκρατίας και που σκοπό έχουν να μας εξοικειώσουν με το περιεχόμενο των εγχειριδίων λειτουργίας των Διευθύνσεων Χρηματοοικονομικής Διαχείρισης στα Υπουργεία, Υφυπουργεία και ανεξάρτητες υπηρεσίες του κράτους. Το συγκεκριμένο εγχειρίδιο, το οποίο ολοκληρώθηκε επιτυχώς πρόσφατα μετά από μια προσπάθεια 2 ετών, αποτελεί μέρος μιας σειράς παραδοτέων, τα οποία έχουν ετοιμαστεί από τον ΟΣΑ, στα πλαίσια της υλοποίησης του πολυφασικού έργου διαχείρισης της αλλαγής για την εφαρμογή μεταρρυθμίσεων στη δημόσια χρηματοοικονομική διαχείριση στην Κύπρο. Σημειώνεται πως το έργο αυτό χρηματοδοτήθηκε από την Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση μέσω της Υπηρεσίας Στήριξης Διαρθρωτικών Μεταρρυθμίσεων της Ευρωπαϊκής Επιτροπής. Η ανάγκη, όπως όλοι γνωρίζουμε, για τη δημιουργία των διευθύνσεων χρηματοοικονομικής διαχείρισης σε όλα τα Υπουργεία και Υφυπουργεία του κράτους προέκυψε από την επιθυμία μας για αναβάθμιση των υπηρεσιών που παρέχουμε οριζόντια ως Γενικό Λογιστήριο της Δημοκρατίας στην δημόσια υπηρεσία. Συγκεκριμένα, πρωταρχικός μας στόχος είναι η στροφή μακριά από τον μονοδιάστατο ρόλο του λογιστή bookkeeper και η αναβάθμισή μας στο ρόλο του συμβούλου, του Χρηματοοικονομικού Συμβούλου, με γνώμονα τα καθήκοντα και τις αρμοδιότητες ενός ανώτατου οικονομικού διευθυντή ή του Chief Financial Officer, CFO, όπως το λέμε, στα αγγλικά, όπως γίνεται σε εκείνες τις δημόσιες υπηρεσίες που θεωρούνται επαγγελματικές και αποτελεσματικές, όπως για παράδειγμα είναι τέτοιες υπηρεσίες στον Καναδά, το Ηνωμένο Βασίλειο, την Αυστραλία και άλλες χώρες. Η κύρια αποστολή των διευθύνσεων μας και των προϊσταμένων τους είναι η παροχή χρηματοοικονομικής πληροφόρησης ψηλής ποιότητας και πρόσθετης αξίας, ούτως ώστε να επιτρέπεται στους διάφορους λήπτες αποφάσεων να λαμβάνουν ενημερωμένες και πληροφορημένες αποφάσεις, οι οποίες να εξυπηρετούν και να ωφελούν το δημόσιο συμφέρον. Η ανάληψη αυτού του ρόλου φέρνει αναμφισβήτητα μεγάλες προκλήσεις, αφού εμείς πρωτίστως έχουμε την ευθύνη να καθιερώσουμε τους εαυτούς μας σαν το πρώτο σημείο επαφής για θέματα χρηματοοικονομικής γνωμοδότησης στα Υπουργεία και τα Υφυπουργεία του κράτους. Οι 4 ρόλοι που περιγράφονται στο εγχειρίδιο και τους οποίους τώρα υιοθετούμε αποτελούν τους πυλώνες πάνω στους οποίους οι διευθύνσεις μας έχουν χτιστεί, καθώς επίσης και μερικά από τα εργαλεία που θα οθήσουν προς τα μπρος τη δημόσια χρηματοοικονομική διαχείριση της χώρας μας, σε συνεργασία με την υιοθέτηση του ERP και τη μετάβαση στη λογιστική βάση των δεδομένων. Η αποτελεσματική λειτουργία αυτών των διευθύνσεων θα επιτρέψει ασφαλώς με τη σειρά της σε αυτά τα δύο τελευταία μεταρρυθμιστικά εργαλεία να αξιοποιηθούν στο μέγιστο δυνατοτήτων τους. Οπότε ο ρόλος που αυτές οι διευθύνσεις διαδραματίζουν στη διαδικασία της δημόσιας διαχείρισης είναι ασφαλώς καθοριστικής σημασίας. Κατ' επέκταση, δεν έχω καμία απολύτως αμφιβολία πως θα είμαστε επιτυχείς σε αυτό το εγχείρημά μας, προσθέτοντας ένα ακόμα λιθαράκι στο μεταρρυθμιστικό πρόγραμμα που βρίσκεται εξέλιξη. Κλείνοντας, θα ήθελα να ευχαριστήσω για άλλη μια φορά τους εμπειρογνώμονες του OECD για την πολύτιμη συνεργασία, τον Σπύρο Ιασεμίδη και όλους τους συνεργάτες μας για την επίτευξη τη ετοιμασία αυτού του εγχειριδίου, να είμαστε σήμερα σε θέση να ακούσουμε τους εμπειρογνώμονες να το επεξηγήσουν με λεπτομέρεια. Θα ακολουθήσει μετά και όπως υπογραφείται αυτό το βίντεο, ούτως ώστε μετά θα μπορούμε να το παρακολουθούμε και με πιο στενή επαφή και μεταγλωτισμένο, το οποίο θα προχωρήσει να κάνει ο συνάδελφος ο Σπύρος ο Ιασεμίδης. Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ. Εύχομαι κάθε επιτυχία στα σεμινάρια τα οποία αρχίζουν από σήμερα και τελειώνουν την επόμενη εβδομάδα. Thank you very much, everybody, for this.
Thank you, Raya. So I think we'll hand over to Tim to take over from here. Is that okay, Tim?
Thanks, Brian. Yes, I'll just share my screen. Able to see that. So good morning, everybody. It's good afternoon from me here in Australia. I am going to give an introduction to the Financial Management Directorate's manual, as Brian has outlined. We're going to cover two chapters of that today, being strategic planning and budgeting and accounting and compliance. We are going to have a short break in the middle because I do understand how difficult it can be sitting in front of a screen for several hours. So we will have a short break between chapters. If people have any questions as we go through, if you type them into the chat function, and we can deal with those as a group because we do have time for questions and discussion at the end of each chapter. So I probably don't need to cover the Financial Management Directorates in any great detail, given that you're all working in them at the moment. But I thought it would be useful just to provide a little bit more of the background in relation to the reforms, particularly for the Financial Management Directorates. Now, I'm not going to read through the slide, but I guess one of the key things with FMDs is to enable the development of financial management capability across the board. I think, as the Accountant General mentioned, sorry, yes, Natalia?
Sorry, could you maybe put in full screen the presentation because it's not easily readable?
Okay. Is that better?
Yes, this is better. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we can circulate the slides to everybody as well if that hasn't already been done. I think as the Accountant General had mentioned, part of the reforms is really about positioning financial management directors in effect as the chief financial officers in the ministries. And the FMD manual is really there to help provide some context and guidance in relation to the functions that need to be fulfilled. One of the challenges, I guess, with all of these types of reforms is the size of financial management directorates and just making sure that people are focused on the important tasks rather than every task that might need to be done. So making sure that workload is evenly distributed, that the functions and the activity is not overly complex, and actually support better financial management in the public sector in Cyprus. The general structure of FMDs, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but one of the important things between the structure of FMDs and the FMD manual is each of the teams within FMDs does align to a chapter within the FMD manual. It doesn't mean that each of those teams is solely responsible for the functions within that chapter, but there is a strong alignment, and partly that will help with cross-skilling people as well if they need to work between the different functions. Overall, the objectives for FMDs, and part of this was covered in Brian's introduction about the objective of the reforms, and it really is about building financial management capability and moving financial management into more of a strategic role rather than just a processing or, as the old phrase would go, a bean counting role. In terms of the FMD manual itself, the manual is intended to actually give an understanding of the types of activities within each of those functions. So it presents the key activities that need to be undertaken and provides general guidance on how those activities should be undertaken. Importantly, the manual doesn't replace or replicate any of the laws or regulations or circulars or other bits of authoritative guidance that are issued from time to time. It is really about general financial management activities, and all of the laws and regulations are still applicable as well. The way the manual is designed, it's also capable of being updated as things change, as the model matures over time, and as some of the other reforms progress, such as accrual accounting and the new financial management information system. In terms of the structure of the manual, it follows a consistent approach all the way through. There is a foreword at the start, then there is a chapter for each of the four main functions, as I mentioned, which align to the team structures within FMDs. And then there's a series of templates that support each chapter, and the templates are there to provide more detailed guidance on the activities or the tasks that need to be undertaken. Within each chapter, there is an introduction. There is a list of the main stakeholders and their roles that they undertake in relation to that function. Then there is a list of activities for that function, as well as any other reference documents that might be relevant. So there can be links to those other documents that will provide more detailed information or further background in relation to a particular function. Within each chapter, there's also a thing called fiches. Fiche is just another word for a table. And I've got an example of that on the next slide. But the table basically shows at a high level what needs to be undertaken in relation to that activity, a very high level guidance on how it should be undertaken, when it should be done, as well as by whom. And the templates are there to support the details that's within each of those tables. This is an example of the tables or the fiches that are included. At the start of each one, there is an objective for that particular activity. And then it just shows the high level, what should be done, how it should be done, who should be responsible, and when it should be done. The table of contents, as we mentioned, the things that we're covering today: strategic planning and budgeting and accounting and compliance. And we will cover procedures and systems and financial reporting next week. So strategic planning and budgeting. So this presentation is really only an introduction to this section, and hopefully if you haven't already seen the FMD manual, you can get access to it and read it in more detail. The key laws that are relevant in relation to the strategic planning and budgeting as outlined, so the Constitution of Cyprus, the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Systems Law, and the Law for Accounting and Financial Management and Financial Control are all very important parts of financial management in the public sector. Other things that are also important in relation to this function are things such as the medium-term fiscal framework, which is the fiscal plan or the budget plan over the next few years that is produced and maintained. The strategic plan, which is prepared for each ministry or deputy ministry, that outlines the objectives for the ministry and also includes its KPIs. And then an activity-based budget, as well as the traditional budget until the reform is completed, are also key components of this particular function. So the manual provides a little bit of a description in relation to each of those. It doesn't mean that FMDs are directly responsible for each of those things, but FMDs have a role in relation to each of those elements. The strategic planning process, so it is coordinated by the Budget Directorate across the government, and FMDs do need to work closely with the Budget Directorates, as they need to also work closely with the Strategic Planning Unit. I guess one of the key elements of the reform that's being undertaken is the idea that collaboration across the public sector between ministries and between the different directors is absolutely critical in terms of being able to deliver high quality financial management. The role of FMDs in all of this, FMDs really are the source of competence for financial management, and the role is really to provide advice and guidance and support in relation to the financial aspects of these processes. This is a high level timeframe. So there is a high level timeframe that's included within the manual, which is really only a general indication of when the key activities occur. More detailed guidance would come out in the budget circular that would be issued by the Ministry of Finance or the Treasury. And it's really about structuring the workload in relation to strategic planning and budgeting so that it is integrated and occurs as it needs to and meets the key dates that are actually legislated in the different laws. So in terms of Chapter 1 and the strategic planning and budgeting function, there's two key sections within this chapter as outlined on the screen. So strategic planning and key performance indicators on the one hand, and then budget preparation, and they are effectively sub-chapters within Chapter 1 of the manual. And the key activities that I will talk through in more detail is really around how FMDs can help prepare themselves for the strategic planning process, the importance of collaborating with SPUs, and some guidance in relation to key performance indicators and how they might be used and improved over time. In relation to budget preparation, it's really about how FMDs will support the budget preparation process, where there are requirements to actually review or develop revenue and expenditure estimates. There's some guidance in relation to that. How to assess project concept notes and project business cases, given that certainly big infrastructure reforms and other types of reforms often occur through projects. There's some guidance in relation to that, as well as consolidating the budget before it's considered by ministers and the Parliament. So in relation to each of the activities, for preparing for strategic planning, what the manual does is provide some guidance for FMD staff around the types of background documents, so informing yourselves around the role of the ministry, the programs or the services it delivers, the structure of the ministry and how each of the departments within the ministry will go about delivering the programs or services or deliver against the objectives that it has. Also, within, I guess, part of the background documents is if there is a current strategic plan, reviewing that current strategic plan and particularly looking at what the financial performance of the ministry has been, and if the data is available, what the performance of programs and activities has been, because part of every strategic planning process is a review of current circumstances, and financial performance is a very important component of looking at what the current circumstances are. In addition to looking at the financial performance, we also suggest that FMDs should look at what progress has been made against the objectives set out in that strategic plan and help identify whatever issues might have occurred that might have prevented those objectives being achieved. The end result of that sort of preparation process is really to identify any issues or concerns that might have occurred in the delivery or progress against the previous strategic plan, talking to the FMD director about what those things might be so that a decision can be made about how the contribution from FMDs can be fed into the strategic planning process for updating the new strategic plan. That type of discussion with the FMD director needs to be supported by an analysis of financial performance. So if there have been changes in revenues and expenses, if there have been variances against budget, those things need to be identified as part of the background review or the review of background documents. The second key activity in the strategic planning and budgeting chapter is around collaborating with the strategic planning units. As I mentioned earlier, FMDs are not the primary area that is responsible for doing these things, but FMDs do need to work closely with strategic planning units, with budget directorate and with others to make sure that the financial elements that are included are appropriate, that they're accurate, and so on. FMDs may also be called on to provide advice on the financial data that should be included within the plan. So there might be particular headlines in relation to financial performance, either for the ministry or for particular programs, that provides important contextual information as part of the strategic planning process. Once there is a draft strategic plan, FMDs should undertake a quality review, which is basically just checking that any financial data that has been included is in line with what was provided, that the activities and programs align to the actual financial results that might have been achieved in previous years or in previous plans, and really just making sure that the data that is presented in the strategic plan is accurate and reliable before the plan is approved and published. The third key activity is around KPI development and improvement. Now, key performance indicators can be both financial and non-financial, and the manual provides some guidance in relation to, call it, common issues with key performance indicators. Sometimes KPIs are qualitative in nature, sometimes they are quantitative in nature. And FMDs are probably more likely to be involved with the quantitative measures, so things like financial data. And it's making sure that if there is a KPI that has financial measures included, that either FMDs provide that information or can at least quality assure that it's consistent with previous periods and is consistent with data that might be in the financial management system or another source system. On occasions, there may be an opportunity to enhance KPIs. There can always be difficulties in sourcing data. I guess the quality of the information needs to be balanced against the amount of time that it takes to collect information, how much it might cost to collect that information, the time frame over which the data is being reported. So if as part of reviewing KPIs and reporting on them, there are opportunities to improve those types of things, then the manual provides some guidance in relation to how to do that. If we then move on to the budget preparation process for Chapter 1, So FMDs have a very important role to play in relation to budget. One of the key elements of that is the development of the budget circular within the ministry. My understanding is there is an internal budget circular within each ministry that is based on the budget circular that is issued by the Treasury. And FMDs do need to work closely with the Budget Directorate and with SPUs on the development of that internal circular and identify the process and timeframes for when things need to be done, whether any assistance needs to be provided on either revenue or expenditure estimates or reviewing business cases, and whether there might be any specific activities that need to be undertaken in relation to financial information. So identifying all of those so that the internal budget circular can be issued that provides a good framework and a template against which that process can progress. Once that internal budget circular has been completed and distributed, it's quite important that the budget activities are then coordinated. So if there are tasks that are outlined in that FMDs need to undertake, then they need to be completed. And if there is any other guidance or decisions of management where FMDs need to complete particular things, then it's really making sure that those things are done in a timely fashion. Some of the more detailed things within the budget preparation process around assisting with the preparation of revenue and expenditure estimates. So this is where FMDs, who are the source of financial competence, may need to provide assistance to the different departments with the development of estimates. Part of that also needs to look at what past performance has been for the particular activity or program to make sure that the estimates are realistic in relation to the budget year. That can be done by looking at what some of the drivers of expenditure might be. So things like number of students, number of welfare recipients or the like would often be identified as drivers of expenditure, and making sure that if there are changes or changes in expectations of what those particular things might be, that they can be updated as part of the preparation of budget estimates. And looking at variances in the past and any commitments that are made and making sure that they are reflected in those estimates. Similar tasks also exist for revenue estimates. So providing assistance where requested by the different departments. Although with revenue, there's probably a couple of additional things that we've identified in the manual around whether there are opportunities for areas, whether there are any arrears in revenue collection that need to be considered. So for example, if receivables are being raised but not collected, any issues in relation to that need to be identified, and basically forecasting what revenue needs to be into the future for particular activities. One of the key points that the manual does make is it's not really for FMDs to decide whether revenue or fees should be charged for a particular activity. That's really a policy decision. It's making sure that where there is a decision to charge fees, that the amount of revenue or the fee that is being set is appropriate and covers the costs of the particular activity. In some cases, there may be items within the budget that are not the responsibility of other departments, but will be the responsibility of FMDs. And where that's the case, if estimates need to be prepared, it's really following the same process as the preparation of budget expenditure estimates and budget revenue estimates. So as I mentioned earlier, projects are often a significant part of public sector management, and the manual does provide some guidance in relation to assessing what's referred to as project concept notes and project business cases. Now, importantly, the manual doesn't replace the existing public investment management manual that is available, nor does it supersede any guidance that might be issued by Treasury headquarters in relation to projects. The role of FMDs is really around assessing the reasonableness of estimates that might be included in project concept notes in particular, and looking at, the need and whether all relevant costs have been included as part of that process. There is a fairly detailed template and checklist that assists with that process that we would encourage FMDs to use and work through. Business cases are very similar to project concept notes. They're just at a greater level of detail. Projects typically will go from the concept or the idea, and if people think it will address the issues and can be afforded, then a more detailed business case will be developed. Again, FMDs will need to work closely with Treasury headquarters and have regard to the public investment manual. But part of reviewing the business case is looking at what estimates are included. Are the estimates in line with the assumptions that have been made? Are there any particular risks that have been identified that might affect the costs or the revenues that are attached to that project? So it's really about assessing and then providing some input to the draft project appraisal report when it's prepared. Again, for the business cases, there is a fairly detailed template that serves as a checklist of things to consider in relation to concept notes and business cases. Finally, the last activity for FMDs is in relation to consolidating the budget. The manual doesn't go into a lot of detail in relation to how that consolidation operates, but it's really about making sure all of the input for budget decisions have been included, that the consolidation's prepared in accordance with any guidance that has been issued, and also undertaking quality assurance check. So just having someone else check that everything that has been included appropriately and accurately. In relation to Chapter 1, these are the templates that are included. I haven't repeated the templates in this presentation, but you could certainly go to the manual and look at them. In many cases, it's checklist. So key things to look for when you're reviewing expenditure estimates or revenue estimates, or the estimates update overall. There is an example estimates update report that's included as a template as well, particularly where estimates are changing in the budget. And then fairly detailed templates on the assessment of project concept notes and assessing project business cases. So with that, I'm happy to pause, and if people have questions, function, or alternatively, just raise your hand and we can take questions or comments.
I stopped your screen sharing, Tim. Does anybody have any questions then? It must have been very clear, Tim. Well done.
Okay, Andreas has dropped in a question and a comment. Andreas, if I sort of paraphrase your question about how much information FMDs have at their fingertips and how much might be held by staff in other departments across the ministry. And I guess the communication and collaboration that needs to occur as part of that. So as we've mentioned a couple of times, collaboration and community absolutely to actually improving financial management. Meeting regularly with those areas can help build that understanding. Some of the other aspects that we'll deal with as part of financial reporting, for example, is having regular meetings with relevant departments to actually understand what issues they face, what might be behind financial performance for them, and I guess really just having open lines of communication. At the outset, having some formal type of meeting arrangement is quite useful. So if there is a process such as the budget process that needs to be undertaken, sometimes it's useful to try and get everybody together to have a single meeting so that everybody can understand what's needed, when it's needed by. If they've got any questions, they can raise them as part of that forum. And having those type of group meetings can actually be quite beneficial in terms of developing a shared understanding of what the requirement might be. That can often be followed up with one-on-one discussions, so either phone calls, Zoom meetings, in-person meetings, if the COVID arrangements allow that, to actually help people understand what's needed and when it's needed by. So it's really about a mix of having formal mechanisms, so formal meeting arrangements to talk about it, which can include everyone that's got an interest in it, as well as some individual contact between FMD staff and staff in the other departments and areas. So hopefully I've addressed your comment well enough, Andreas. Happy for you to comment more if you would like.
Oh yeah, thank you very much, Tim. Yeah, I mean, the purpose of this question really, it was, I mean, to highlight, to point out to that communication, I mean, with the rest of colleagues in ministries or departments is absolutely essential. And to get your third-party confirmation in order for the FMDs to be able to perform this upgraded, if I may use the term, role which is expected of them. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I think one of the other important things to recognise as part of this is FMDs are there to assist and to help the departments and the line areas with their financial management activities. But that doesn't necessarily make them responsible for the performance of, or the financial performance of those particular activities. And this is where the collaboration part becomes quite important, that FMDs are there to help people navigate what can be quite often complex or complicated compliance requirements, to help them understand the story or the message behind financial performance that might be coming through. But at the end of the day, those departments are still responsible for delivering those particular things. So I guess it's important to make sure that, you know, it really is a service orientation that FMDs have in helping departments deliver what they need to deliver. It's not a case of trying to shift work from departments and make it the responsibility of FMDs.
Yeah, thank you, Tim.
Any other comments or questions on strategic planning and budgeting?
Philippos, Catherine has raised a hand.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the presentation. It was quite informing, and it's important for everybody to get a feeling of the manual and the content. I wanted to ask regarding this relationship with the strategic planning units. how important it is for our FMDs to have an in-depth knowledge of the business aspect of the operations of the ministry.
Thanks, Philippos. And others may like to comment as well. My view is it's absolutely important for FMDs to have an understanding of the activities of the ministry and of the various departments, but they will never have the same level of detail as staff within those departments will have. My view on the expectation of FMDs is really about, on financial matters, they should know what's going on in particular departments. And then it's working closely with those departments on what are the drivers behind that financial performance and helping them identify any remedial activity or corrective activity that might need to be undertaken to get a particular thing back on budget or back on target. So they do need to have a reasonable knowledge of the activities within those particular areas, but they do not need to be the experts on the activities in those particular areas.
Thank you, Tim.
Tim, you said others might like to comment. Just basically, I just reiterate what you said. Many years ago, I had experience of working with a finance officer. It was a slightly different setup in the Irish context, but there was a finance officer there who made it his business to understand to a reasonable degree what the objectives and what the workings of the various areas of his ministry were. And it came in very handy on a number of occasions. But he didn't attempt to have the same kind of knowledge as people at the coalface would have, because it wasn't his job. But he did try to familiarize himself in order to understand the context. And on one particular occasion, he saved the ministry from a rather large embarrassment, where they would have, because of a change in the rules around financing new activities, which hadn't gone before the Parliament. And the people in the area didn't know this, but because he was familiar with this part of with what their objectives were, and of course, he was able to contact them and explain to them what they had to do. But there was also a part of it was due to the fact that he knew he was familiar with their work and what they were going to be doing.
It's a good point. And I think one of the things you said, Brian, that I probably would re-emphasize, it's reasonable knowledge of the activities within those other areas. But FMDs do need to have expert knowledge on the financial processes and the financial practices, so that if someone comes seeking guidance on a particular thing, FMDs can provide the guidance in relation to the financial processes that might need to be followed.
Okay. Nobody else? We can take our break then. If there's no one else to ask questions, we'll take our 5-minute break and then we can resume it at
on the clock.
Yeah.
So it's 5 to 5 in the afternoon for me. So 5 p.m. will be, I guess, 10 a.m. or something.
Yeah, it's 8 a.m. where I am.
Yeah. So if we resume then, if people have any comments or questions that occur to them during the and we can pick those up when we resume at 5 p.m. exactly.
Lovely. Okay, yeah.
Thanks, Andreas.
We meet in 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, great.
Thank you.